Hi everyone, it's Andrée from Aspiring Future Competence and author of Behind the Mask. And on this lovely sunny day, I have with me for an interview Anthony Donovan. And I've known Anthony a number of years, and we met when we were both working as associate consultants for Reed Training. Anthony is a very highly experienced training and coaching consultant. He's always full of wit, has loads and loads of lovely ideas. He's very, very creative. And you know, he's the go-to person if you need some help on something. So he gives you some great ideas. So this interview this afternoon is about authenticity, and particularly living authentically and authenticity in leadership. So I'm going to hand over to Anthony to introduce himself, if you would, to the audience.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, Andrée, thank you for the, I'm blushing. Thank you for the introduction. Very kind words. So yeah, thank you very much. So I've been running my my business. This is my 16th year of trading, and I guess I wear two hats. So I'm a qualified business coach, and then I design and deliver bespoke learning interventions, mainly in the field of leadership, but also in sales. And prior to that, I spent 10 years, privileged enough to spend 10 years working for Reed, as you mentioned, but actually it's for the main recruitment business. So as a consultant, and then latterly heading up the learning and development team, which gave me good grounding, I think, into what we do now. So that's me, and that's my background.
Okay. And as we go into the bit about authenticity, I'm sure you're going to share some snippets of, you know, organisational cultures and clients that you perhaps work with, without obviously naming them, of course. But okay, that's great. You've got a wealth of experience, like I said before, and you know, you're always the person you can turn to and, yeah, have you tried this? You know, so it's great to have someone on board like that. What does authenticity mean to you then?
I think you can apply authenticity in lots of different settings, be it professionally, in your personal life. But I think the one thing that underpins all of that, for me anyway, is integrity. And I guess what I mean by that is, if you're doing something, it's not a tick box exercise. You're doing it because you genuinely want to do that, and I think it adds some value. So if I share a quick example of what I mean, so I was actually speaking to somebody just yesterday, coaching them around presentation skills, and when we were talking about what they wanted to get from the session, they'd been to a big conference, 250 plus people at the beginning of this year, and he openly admitted that he was really nervous about delivering this presentation, and people were coming up at the end and saying, "Oh no, you were really good." He knew in himself that he didn't deliver what he wanted to do to the best of his ability. And his boss came up and said, words to the effect of, "I'm not going to lie to you. You know better than I do that wasn't your strongest performance. Let's have a conversation around why that was, and let's have a conversation about what we can do to support you." And he said, as much as it was difficult to hear those words at the time, it meant so much more than this shallow, "Yeah, you were great." And I think that in that one example, that leader demonstrated authenticity, as did my client, because he was big enough to be open to the feedback and then seek some help with it. So that's, for me, in one example, sums it up.
It's a great story, actually. But yeah, integrity is one of my top core values. And when you're dealing with clients, you have to have integrity so they trust and respect you. Okay, so in terms of your own life, what do you do in your own life to be or stay authentic?
I think it's something you've always got to work out. Listen, no one's perfect, leave alone me. But what I try to do is, I guess, be true to myself. And if I use a professional example to put that up, so like many of our colleagues, we don't offer off-the-shelf products. We offer products that are bespoke. And I think there's authenticity behind that, because if you start with the learner's perspective in mind, first of all, nobody wants to go through a tick box exercise. So to give you a couple of practical examples, I was asked to do a piece for an organisation that manufacture and make luxury holiday homes. That's posh caravans, you and I, Andre, but they, and
Okay.
funnily enough, as you know, probably know me, I didn't know a huge amount about that marketplace, and I was asked to go in and do a sales piece to support them with selling. And I'm thinking, well, if I were those individuals, somebody coming in from outside the industry, starting to spout out about where you should be doing this, well, I can only say that I wouldn't feel too comfortable. So what I asked to do was to spend a day out in the field and out on the road with somebody who was really experienced, just to get a view of their world, and to ask questions and to listen to them. I learned loads. There's a lot to posh caravans, it turns out, more than I thought. But I think crucially from there, what that meant was that once that individual realised that I wasn't there to, quote, tell them how to do their job, it certainly made that a lot easier. The second piece around that is I always attempt to design specific scenarios, case studies, activities, whatever you want to call it, for that particular client. And actually spending that time with that particular lady actually helped me to design something so that when we came to do the session, the delegates thought, well, hang on, this has been thought through, this is realistic. Yes, that's typically the sort of objective we would get. Yes, that's typically the kind of scenario. Yes, the pricing is correct, and so on. So I guess it's trying to be authentic in the sense that it looks like the real world. And I think the other piece, which I'm sure you do as well, Andre, is when you stood up in front of a group of people who have never met you before, it's important to be honest that you may not know absolutely everything about their organization, but by the same token, I've been brought in for a reason, and hopefully some external knowledge combined with learning more about that organization makes the whole piece feel that little bit more authentic. So that would be my response.
Brilliant. That's a lovely example as well. Do you find, I often do, you're standing in front of a group of people and maybe you're doing some case studies or role plays, and what they say is, well, we don't do this now, this isn't our business. And what I say to them, it's the learning. It doesn't matter what the case study is. It doesn't have to totally fit your business, because what happens is they end up getting so wrapped up in the bureaucracy, the rules and regulations of that business, they actually stop learning. So sometimes, and I do the same, I go into companies and spend time with them, understanding their culture, their needs, their people, because otherwise, you can't stand up there and deliver something without knowing a little bit about the background of the business.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the closer you can get to a realistic scenario, the more impactful the learning will be. But I think it's showing that little bit of humility, which you touched on, integrity being one of your key values. I think humility links in with one of mine, which I'm sure we'll go on to talk about later. But it's just trying to be genuine and trying to be honest with people.
Yeah. And also, if you're not the expert in that field, I'll be honest with the client and say, I'm happy to to bring someone else in, one of my associates or somebody who has that area of expertise, bring them in and we can talk further. But I'm not necessarily, I'm not a specialist in every field.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's about that honesty. And yet I've had some trainers and coaches saying, oh, don't ever do that, just take it and worry about it afterwards. Well, I can't, because that goes against my integrity and my professionalism, my values.
No, I'd agree.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of leadership in organisations then, what do you believe the benefits are of authentic leadership in terms of people, performance, etc.?
Good question. I would say there are multiple benefits, but if I were going to bring it down to 2 or 3, I would suggest accountability, ownership, buy-in. Again, I'll share a quick example if I can. Obviously, in the current climate, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty around, and one of my clients we worked with for a number of years, they're going through an uncertain period, and there's potential for restructure. And they, again, they've been very honest with people about that. They're not trying to hide. Their communication's very, very good. They've got a very good leadership team. And I was having a conversation with a group of delegates just last week, and one of them raised a question and said, I don't get it. Why is it that everybody in the organisation is, to quote them, busting a gut to get things done, when frankly there's no certainty that I'll have a job at the end, that there's certainly no promotion prospects. We've already been told that our typical annual bonus frankly is not happening, and so on and so forth. Why is it, myself included, she said, that we're doing this? I mean, and it was an interesting discussion, and what it led down to was, it wasn't policies, it wasn't procedures, it was down to the individuals that they worked for. And it was down to the fact that the leadership team had been very open, as honest as they could be, of course. Simple things, Andre, like saying thank you. Simple things like saying, I'm not going to promise you something I can't deliver. And just being human beings about it. And it turns out that what they're doing is working really, really hard for those individuals. Plus, I would say for themselves, I think it says a lot about their own, I'm going to go back to the word I used earlier, their own integrity. So I think when you look at all of that, where you see examples of organizations with authentic leadership, the things they have in common is people generally buy into the big picture. There's accountability, they take ownership, and they've bought into it. And I think you get it back in spades, retention of staff, and so on. And I'm not going to name names, obviously, but there's certain organizations that you come across where you look at some of the big challenges they have around poor communication, lack of trust, silo mentality. I went into one organization once and I asked the leadership team to describe the culture of their organization, and the response came back, the patient died, but the operation was a success. And I am hastening to add, it wasn't a medical organization, it was something completely separate. But what they were saying was, well, we did our bit. The fact it fails further down the line is nothing to do with me. Now, as I got to know that organization a bit better and started to understand it, that stemmed from that boardroom, in my opinion. So I think it runs right the way through the organization. I am hastening to add they were going through a leadership change, so they're in a much better space now.
Oh, that's good to know.
but it's a good example, because you can start to see some of those silos being broken down. Like anything, is work in progress, but yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and I would say, that's another great example. And authentic leadership leads to, like you said, people feel valued, they want to work for you, they'll go all out. Engagement is a key term. That's one of the ways you get engaged people. And like you said, if they're authentic, yeah, they may be saying, we can't promise you this, we don't know if their jobs, they're being honest. But if they're still willing to invest in their people, even though they don't know what the future holds, that's a positive. And I often get the delegates, oh, well, I'm going to lose my job, what's the point of all this? And I say to them that they are still valuing you, which is why you're sitting here now. So rather than moan about it, learn from it, take what you can, because if you do lose your job, at least you've got this qualification or this training under your belt.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah. So you sort of touched on it slightly earlier and said, oh, I'm sure we'll come back to that later on, which we are. We're going to look at core values. So what are your top values then? So
again, I'll preface this by saying that it's always a work in progress. Just because they're my values doesn't mean I'm always world class at it. What I aspire to be from a core value, and what I value most in other people, I guess, as well, is the first one would be to avoid making assumptions and listening to hearsay. So, for example, if you're going to be working with a group of delegates, or even on a coaching basis, somebody will often try and give you let me give you some background to them. And I would typically say, I'd rather not. I'd rather make my own view. I don't want to be led by unconscious bias or whatever it might be. And I think certainly from a coaching perspective, you can't make assumptions, because then you start leading people into conversation. So that would be the first one. And then the second one, this is a strange one. This actually comes from my mum, who is one of the most authentic people I've ever met. So this is one that's very, very close. And one of the things she's always says is never do anything or behave in a way that you'd be embarrassed about somebody else finding out.
Oh.
Which I think is a really interesting one. So again, if your emotions are running high, or perhaps you're having a heated conversation, you've got somebody who is perhaps not performing as well as they might want to, or the perception is that they're perhaps being lazy, or whatever it might be that pushes those buttons, it's always try and behave in a way that you would never be embarrassed if somebody said, oh, did you hear what Anthony said, or did you hear what Anthony did? And I think the third one, and you may have seen, Andrée, we had a perfect example of this just today, is to seek to give rather than take, and because you get that back in spades. And the example I'm referring to is someone that you and I, a dear friend of both of ours, Zach, who's been working really hard on a piece of work, has kindly, obviously taking out any confidential pieces, said, look, I've been doing some research, and he's just said to a group of us, look, you might find some value in this. He doesn't want anything back in return, and Zach's someone who's typical like that. He's so generous, and I'd like to think that people would be more than happy to give back as well. So I think for me, it's the generosity of looking to give rather than to take. And I think if you apply that to a leadership style, whether it be giving someone a piece of your time, or a piece of advice when it's sought after, it goes a long way. So they would be my core values that I admire in others and aspire to have myself.
Oh, you definitely have. I think that's a lovely one that your mum shared with you. I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a personal one, but it resonated, or resonates, I should say. And it's something that I've got 2 children, and I've tried to pass on to them as well. So
yeah, no, they're good. But yeah, we're always trying to aspire to. You can't always, I say you need to live through your values. But there are times where you are up against it. There's something happened, and when you have to release that value some way in order to move forward, it feels uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. But sometimes you have to do it in order to overcome a situation. But, yeah,
absolutely.
And lastly, but not least, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I don't think there's anything too specific, other than to thank you first of all for inviting me to have a conversation. As always, I always enjoy speaking with you, Andrée, and I think it's just being true to yourself. I know it's very old-fashioned, and it's, dare I say, a little bit of a cliche, but I think that really sums up everything that we've kind of talked about so far.
Yeah, it's true to yourself, being genuine. And talking about the example you gave a moment ago with the person who I love dearly, he is the most genuine, kind, authentic person I've ever had the honour to have met. He's just a great guy.
Well, he's not that nice, let's be honest.
Oh,
he's all right, but no, he is.
He is, but and that comes back to what we talked about a little earlier about collaboration before we started this interview. If you give to somebody, you don't expect anything back in return. But
yeah, absolutely. But you typically do get it back in spades.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for spending this afternoon talking to me. Really appreciate that. So
Pleasure as always.
So just Anthony Donovan, and your company name is
Donovan Training Associates.
Donovan.
So I'm on LinkedIn and on all good websites. So yeah, look me up.
And so I'm going to say over and out to everybody. Andrée Fennell, Aspiring Future Competence, and thank you once again, Anthony, for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks, Andrée.